spinning. I disagree with that decision not to tag people. I don't know why it says I can't tag people. Okay, we're back with part 2 of our study in the book of Ruth. And it is just me today because between school, working for the basketball league, and making all those Christmas orders and whatnot, Ashley has been busy and hadn't had a chance to go over this one. So I asked her if it was okay if I went ahead and did part 2 tonight, so we can kind of get back on track. She's going to be back with me for the next one, but tonight we're going to do part 2 of our study of the book of Ruth. And feel free to, this is live on Facebook, but feel free to take part in the comments, I guess, and maybe this won't be a one-man show. But anyway, we are in Ruth chapter 1. Last time we started in Ruth chapter 1 and went through verse 18. Just a quick recap. Naomi's husband Elimelech took the family, left Bethlehem because of a famine, went into Moab. In the city of Moab is where the two sons met. I want to call her Oprah, but it's more like Orpah, and Ruth married them. Elimelech died, the two sons died, and we left off with Naomi was going back. She heard that God had visited his people in Bethlehem, visited the Israelites, and she was going back to her people, back to Israel, and she told Orpah and Ruth to return to their people. That, she's old, I have no more sons for you. If I did have more sons, are you going to wait till they're old enough to get married? All this kind of stuff. And it said that they both wept, but both also made a choice. Orpah went back, but Ruth said she was going to cling to Naomi. We said Ruth saw something in the 10 years that Naomi was in Moab, the things that Naomi went through, the losses, the heartaches, the hard times. She saw something in her to make her say, I don't know what you got, but whatever it is, I'm going to stick with you and I want it. So that's kind of where we left off. So they're headed back. So again, I printed off my scripture so I'm not flipping back and forth in my notes, and I'm just going to go through like I did last time. A few verses, my take. A few more verses, my take. I don't have Ashley here to try to get to comment. So if you got something, throw it out there and we'll talk about it. But we're going to start in Ruth chapter 1. And we're going to start in verse 19. Ruth chapter 1 verse 19, it says, So they two, talking about Ruth and Naomi, they two went until they came to Bethlehem. And it came to pass, when they were come to Bethlehem, that all the city was moved about them. And they said, Is this Naomi? And she said unto them, Call me not Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty hath dealt bitterly with me. I went out full, and the Lord hath brought me home again empty. Why then call ye me Naomi, seeing that the Lord hath testified against me, and the Almighty hath afflicted me? And that's chapter 1, verses 19 through 21. And a couple of things that stick out I want to look at is the names. Her name is Naomi. The name Naomi means pleasant. The name that she says when she comes back, so she left pleasant, she left full, she left with a family. She came back, she says, The Almighty hath dealt bitterly with me. I went out full, and the Lord hath brought me home again empty. Well, one thing, let's just say this right here. If you're with the Lord, you can go out full, but you're never going to be empty as long as you have the Lord. You might come back feeling you've lost a lot of stuff. You might come back, you might go through some hard times, through some troubles, and you may lose some physical, some temporal, some worldly things along the way, but you'll never come back empty as long as you're with the Lord. But anyway, Naomi's telling them, don't call me Naomi, which meant pleasant. Call me Mara, which means bitter. And if you look at Exodus 15:23, Exodus 15:23 says, "And when they came to Marah, they could not drink of the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore the name of it was called Marah." And I put, through Moses' obedience to God, the water was made sweet and drinkable. And God can take what's bitter in our life and bring forth sweet rivers. Naomi is an example here. Naomi had lost her husband. Naomi had lost both of her sons. She was she wasn't bitter, but in a bitter situation, in a tough situation. Things weren't going good. Things weren't going right. Things weren't going the way that she had envisioned them in her mind. She wasn't going to see her grandkids grow up and all these great things in life. All her plans and all her expectations had changed. But God can take those things and turn them and take them from bitter to sweet in our lives. And I put down here, and Anna actually sung it last night at church, there come sweet things out of dark places. We can go through darkness. David wrote over there, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I have no fear, because God's with me." We can go through dark things. We can go through trying times, and God can make sweet, beautiful things happen from those if we'll trust Him. And we don't have to understand. It's not meant for us to understand, I don't think, everything that we go through in life. Every bad thing. The Bible says it rains on the just and the unjust. It's going to happen. We're going to go through trials. We're going to go through tribulations. We don't have to understand them. But we do understand that there's a God who loves us and a God who will guide us through those things if we'll just follow. He's the shepherd. We're the sheep. We have to follow Him through those dark places sometimes. And it builds our strength, it builds our faith, it builds our character, it builds our testimony for somebody else down the road. Maybe you're battling with something. Maybe you've got a bad diagnosis, it's cancer, or this day, everything's COVID related. And you've been through that. And you've struggled and maybe even lost something, someone. God has a reason and God has a purpose for all of what we see as dark places in our life. God has a reason and a purpose, because it's to bring forth sweet things if we will trust Him and let Him use us the way we're supposed to be used. Let Him use those dark times the way they're supposed to be used. And Naomi here was telling them, don't call me pleasant, call me bitter. But what Naomi hadn't grasped yet was the end goal. Like we've said before, our life is a big 5 gazillion piece puzzle, and we see 1 or 2 pieces and God sees them all. The same with Naomi. She didn't see the end of this story. She didn't see the end of the book of Ruth at this time. But because of their faithfulness, because of Naomi and because of Ruth and their faithfulness and going through these dark times and not turning away, Ruth actually finds her name in the generations that lead to Jesus. Naomi is part of that bloodline that leads, not physical bloodline, but her daughter-in-law Ruth and Boaz. They lead through that bloodline to Jesus. Where would they have been in that had they have gave up during these dark times? If she had said, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, God has treated me bitterly, and she had responded bitterly, but she didn't. And we'll get to that here. Let me read verse 22. Chapter 1, verse 22 says, So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, with her, which returned out of the country of Moab. And they came to Bethlehem in the beginning of the barley harvest. And I put here, what was Naomi's mood or attitude coming back? And Naomi had already said, backing up some verses, and we've hit on this. It seems like I've nagged on this for a minute here. Don't call me pleasant. Don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara. Call me bitter. But Naomi's attitude coming back wasn't a bitter attitude. Naomi's attitude was a repentant and honest. She was honest with herself. She was honest with the people. I've been through some tough times. And I've thought to myself there, why is it so hard for us to be honest with ourselves? It's hard. We think we struggle sometimes being honest, number one, with God, and He knows already. So there's no reason we there's nothing we can hide from Him, but we hide things. We think we can hide things from ourselves too, and we try not to be honest with ourselves. But she came back in an honest mood, in an honest demeanor, repentant demeanor. She knew that she had lost things in Moab, but she was looking for what God was going to do in Bethlehem. So verse 22 ends chapter 1 of the book of Ruth. So we're going to pick up and start chapter 2. Chapter 2, verse 1, it says, "And Naomi had a kinsman of her husband's." This would be Elimelech's kinfolk. "Naomi had a kinsman of her husband's, a mighty man of wealth of the family of Elimelech, and his name was Boaz." Okay, now stop here and I want to look at it. It says a mighty man of wealth. Boaz was this man from the family of Elimelech. And we don't know from the scripture, but I would like to think, if I could for a minute, if Boaz is a mighty man of wealth and he's from Elimelech's family and from his bloodline, that maybe before fleeing Bethlehem from the famine, Elimelech might have also been a mighty man of wealth. And I thought about the wealth that we see or the world sees. A mighty man of wealth in those times. Lots of land, lots of servants, lots of cattle, lots of material things. And let's imagine in our mind that when Elimelech left and went to, just imagine with me, when he left Bethlehem and went to Moab, let's imagine him as a mighty man of wealth. But where was he 10 years later? Elimelech was gone. His wealth, his worldly wealth was nowhere to be found. He had lost his life. His sons had lost their lives. A choice had been made by Elimelech. How often do we make a choice to flee from the difficult in hopes of the easy? And I said, this isn't what God expects us to do. God doesn't expect us to flee from the difficult things that come our way in life in hopes of finding an easier way. The world wants us to flee. The world wants to offer us an easier way that's just going to draw us further and further away from God and find us in a worse and worse condition and a worse and worse shape. And before we know it, we're under the barrel trying to claw our way out. And I said here some examples. An example of how we should respond to difficulties, trials, and I use the word giants because I'm going to go to 1 Samuel for an example. And I want to read very familiar scripture. This is David and Goliath. So it's in 1 Samuel chapter 17. I printed these out. I'm going to read verse 34 through 37 and then jump to 45 through 48. And I want to point out a few things that David did when he battled Goliath that we need to do in our everyday battle with the giants that we face. And let me first say that, at least for Jeremy, most of the giants I face really aren't giants. Most of the mountains I think I have to climb are really molehills. They might look like mountains in my eyes sometimes, but sometimes I make little things out to be big mountains, and God's like, chill out, dude. It's not that bad. I'm with you, number one. And what you're trying to make this huge situation is not a huge situation. But let's read here as we're talking about how God expects us to do, respond to difficulties. Thinking, again, we're thinking of Elimelech fleeing Bethlehem. But let's see how we can compare this to David and Goliath. And 1 Samuel chapter 17, starting in verse 34, it says, "And David said unto Saul, Thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went out after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing that he hath defiled the armies of the living God. David said, moreover, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of the Philistine. And Saul said unto David, Go, and the Lord be with thee. One, David had tried God. David knew what God could do. David had that understanding of, yeah, it might look bad. A lion, a bear, a giant, whatever it is might look bad, but I know what my God can do. Now let's skip down in that to verse 45. It says, Then said David to the Philistine, Thou comest to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a shield. But I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. This day will the Lord deliver thee into my hand, and I will smite thee, and take thine head from thee. And I will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air, and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And all the assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. And it came to pass, when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, listen to this, that David hasted and ran toward the army to meet the Philistines. David didn't run away from the giant. David saw how big he was. David saw how bad he was. David knew how big his sword was. David knew that, he towered over everybody else, and he put fear into everybody else, and nobody could conquer this guy physically. He was a beast. David knew all this. But what does it say? David hasted. He didn't waste time. David hasted and ran toward the Philistine. David ran toward the giant. How many times in our lives do we run away from our giants instead of toward our giants? And what does that show? It shows, in my life at least, a lack of faith. Because with faith, David said here, he said, I come to you in the name of God. You've got sword, you've got spear, you've got all of this stuff. Man, all I got is God. But I've got enough faith in my God. Why? Because I've seen what he's done with a bear. I've seen what he's done with a lion. I've experienced this. And I've got the faith to know I'm going to run at you. I'm going to take you on head on. Whether I win, whether I lose, God's in control. And whatever his will is, that's what's going to happen. But I'm going to face you head on. I'm not running from this giant. And I put here that God never intended for any of us to run away from our problems. And you'll find over in Ephesians, and I'm not going to read all these, but Ephesians chapter 6, verse 11 through 17 describes the whole armor of God, the whole armor that we're supposed to wear. The helmet of salvation, the breastplate, have your feet shod, all those different things that it notes. But I always found it interesting that it never once did Paul write that there's a back plate that we have on protecting our back. And why is that? Because it's not intended for us to run away. It's not intended for us to turn from our problems. Blake talked about last night after our first preaching, during our second preaching, what is there to turn back to? If you've experienced true salvation and you're no longer part of the world, when you look back, what are you going to go back to? What else is there? And I've heard two different versions of this, and I don't know which one's right. One said it was the Vikings, and one said it was Cortez, the conqueror, or whatever. But I like the point of the story is when they went out to conquer these lands, they come up on ship, and when their ship sailed ashore, all the soldiers, all the conquerors got off the ship. They were ordered to burn the boats. And you think, well, that sounds crazy. Why would you burn your own boats? Because then you're forced. You either win or you die trying to win. But you're not going to turn back and leave. That's how we should live our life as a Christian. Because we're winners either way. Whether we go, whether we stay. We're winners either way. Whether we face our giant and defeat it, or we face our giant and God sees fit to call us home. But the point is, we're not to turn and run. There is no back plate in the armor of God. And that's maybe a stretch on verse 1 in Ruth, but that I like that thought. We have a mighty man of wealth, but he ran. He left during the famine. He left when things got tough. Maybe he thought the grass was greener over in Moab. But see what it cost him. It cost him his life. It cost him everything. Because he didn't stay and face and trust, put his faith and his trust in God. Jumping ahead, we're going to go read verses 2 and 3 from chapter 2 here. It says, And Ruth the Moabitess said unto Naomi, Let me go to the field, and glean ears of corn after him in whose sight I shall find grace. And she said unto her, Go, my daughter. And she went and came and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And her hap was to lie on a part of the field belonging unto Boaz. It's just by chance, but not by chance. It was by God's providence. God had this plan. But it says it was by hap that she was to lie on part of the field belonging unto Boaz, who was the kindred of Elimelech. And I want to go here and talk about what it means to glean. What is gleaning? That's not a word we use today. It's an old word. And you look it up. To glean means to gather the leftover grain after the harvest. So what she was doing was the harvesters went in, and so she was gleaning the ears of corn. So they're in the cornfield. This huge cornfield. I'm imagining acres, hundreds of acres upon hundreds of acres that Boaz has of corn, and all of his hired servants go in and harvest the corn. She's coming in behind them and just picking up the scrap that gets left. She's going in and finding what's left. And what's significant about the gleaning process that I found is that it was set up by God as a means not of welfare, but if you study it, gleaning was a social assistance program. That's what I called it. And you can find this in Leviticus 19, verses 9 through 10. I'm going to read those and then explain exactly what the gleaning was doing. And this is God giving commands to Moses for his people. And in verses 9 and 10 of chapter 19 of Leviticus, it says, And when you reap the harvest of your land, thou shalt not wholly reap the corners of thy field, neither shalt thou gather the gleanings of thy harvest. In other words, you leave it. You go through, and what gets missed or what gets dropped, you leave it. And thou shalt not glean the vineyard, neither shalt thou gather every grape out of the vineyard. Thou shalt leave them for the poor and stranger. I am the Lord your God. And why I said this is more of a social assistance program than a welfare program is because in gleaning, it wasn't just give to them. It wasn't, hey, you're the poor, you're the stranger, here's some corn, have it. Here's some grapes, have it. There was still work required. And I think that's important because God, once he saves us, I'm saved, but there's still work required of me. I still have things that I need to glean in life, but are we willing to glean to get closer to him and to learn more about him and to seek the answers we're looking for? Are we willing to do that? I mean, we get high and mighty and think, I'm saved, I'm a Christian, I don't have to go behind the harvester and glean what's left behind because I'm one of his. But are we willing to put in the work and put in the effort to get what we need or what we're looking for from the Lord? The Lord's willing to give it, it says here. He was given to the poor. He was given to the needy. He was given to the outcast. But there was work required in order to get what you needed. Today we live in a society that everybody wants everything handed to them without having to put in any work. And that's not how anything in life was designed from the beginning. That was not how things were designed. We have to put in the work. We have to We have to get down on our knees and cry out to God and glean through what He's throwing our way to find those pieces we need. So I think the gleaning of the field is fairly significant, the terms there. Okay, moving on. I'm trying to do this in less than an hour this time. One, because I'm in our back bedroom and it's freezing cold in here for some reason. I'm going to read verses. This is still in chapter 2 of Ruth. We're going to go verse 4 through 7. And starting in verse 4 it says, And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and said unto the reapers, The Lord be with you. And they answered him, The Lord bless thee. Then said Boaz unto his servant that was set over the reapers, Whose damsel is this? And the servant that was set over the reaper answered and said, It is the Moabitish damsel that came back with Naomi out of the country of Moab. And she said, being Ruth, she said, I pray you, let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. So she came and hath continued even from the morning until now, that she tarried a little in the house. So she's there, she's in the field gleaning, and we come to the point where Boaz first notices Ruth, and he's like, hey, who's the chick out there gleaning my field? He notices her, and he starts to ask questions. And Ruth, in my opinion, at this point is under inspection. She's under inspection of Boaz. He wants to know more about her. He wants to know what's going on here. And I thought about, that's kind of ironic because Ruth had watched Naomi all those years and saw something in her. Now Ruth is becoming the one that's being watched. And how does that play into our lives? Well, every day somebody's watching us. They watch how we respond at work. They watch how we take bad news, maybe from the doctor, bad news from our boss. How or if, let's go away from how and say if we stand up for the Lord when it's not popular. We are under inspection, just like Ruth was watching Naomi, just like Boaz was watching Ruth. Somebody, it may be your children, it may be your mom or dad, aunt, uncle, co-worker. Somebody is watching your life every day, and they're watching to see how you're going to respond. And unfortunately, the world's watching, wanting to see us. If you're a Christian, if you're a born-again Christian, the world's wanting to see you fall on your face. But God's saying, let me pick you back up, and let's dust you off and not make a big scene of this, not make a big mess in front of the world, because we want to show them that there's something different about you, and it's me, not me, Jeremy, me, God. I'm in you. Show that to them. When you fall down, get up. When you get the bad news, press on. There's more than just the temporal things around us in this world, and we're under inspection, and it's important because we're going to give an account for these things when we stand before God. I believe every time I've had an opportunity to say something to somebody or be that witness, whether it be by the words that come out of my mouth or how I respond or how I help or whatever it might be, I've got to give an account for everything I've done when I stand before God. I'm under inspection daily. You're under inspection daily. The world is looking because they know, deep down, they know in their heart they're missing something. And they want to know why that crazy Christian is so happy all the time, even when everything's falling apart. How has he managed this? Well, we got to show them. We got to tell them. If we're under inspection, let's give them something to look at. They're going to look either way. So let's give them something good to look at. Let's see. So we're moving on. I'm going to read verse 8 and 9. And I got a little comparison here. And I'm going to stop at verse 9 for this study. And part 3 we'll pick up with Ruth chapter 2 verse 10 and go through, I don't know how far yet. But let me read verse 8 and 9 and talk about what I've got for this real quick. Chapter 2 verse 8 says, Then said Boaz unto Ruth, Hearest thou not, my daughter? Go not to glean in another field, neither go from hence, but abide here fast by my maidens. Let thine eyes be on the field that they do reap, and go thou after them. Have I not charged the young men that they shall not touch thee? And when thou art athirst, go into the vessels, and drink of that which the young men have drawn. And I want to talk about the three things that Ruth found in Boaz's, the three things that Ruth found in Boaz's field. And we're going to look at them here in these two verses, verse 8 and verse 9. It gives us three pretty important things that she found. Number one, companionship. Look at the end of verse number 8. It says, "But abide here fast by my maidens." Ruth had left her country. She had left her family. She had left her friends. She had left everything she was used to, everybody she knew. She left her old life behind. But in Boaz's field, Ruth finds companions. He says, abide here by the maidens. She finds those to strengthen her. We find strength in our companions. So, one, Ruth found companionship in Boaz's field. Number two, and if I was good like my Uncle Jeff, I can make all three of these start with the same letter, but I'm not. But number two, love you, Jeff. Number two, in Boaz's field, Ruth found protection. In verse 9, Boaz tells Ruth, "Have I not charged the young men that they shall not touch thee?" Ruth was young. She was probably a nice-looking lady. She was a single lady. She didn't have a husband to protect her. She was vulnerable, especially probably before the men working in the field. I don't know back in the BCs what it was like, men working in the field, but I think of now, you see and it's just a stereotype, but the construction job and the woman that walks by and all the men whistling and doing what men do when the woman walks by the construction job. That's how I picture this. Ruth was in a very vulnerable situation, but Boaz provided protection for Ruth. He said, "I've charged the men that not a single one of them better touch you. They better not bother you. They better not catcall you, whistle, all these things. I've told them, hey, none of that. You are protected as long as you're in my field." Now, remember, he told her to stay in his field and don't go to another field. Can't protect you over there on Jim Bob's field over there in the back 40. His men's crazy. But I've charged my men, and as long as you're in my field, you have my protection. That's what Boaz is telling to Ruth. Okay, so she's found companionship with the maidens. She's found protection under Boaz. She finds refreshment. What's it say here just after that about the men in verse 9? "And when thou art athirst, go into the vessels and drink of that which the young men have drawn." Boaz gave her permission to go drink the water that the young men had drawn. When she got hot, when she got tired, when she got exhausted, Boaz had not only gave her some companions, said, "Here, stay with my maidens." Not only did he give her protection and said, as long as you're in my field, you're under my eyesight, you are protected and safe. But Boaz gave her refreshment. He said, when you get hot, when you get tired, when the way gets long, when the sun's beaming down and it's 152 degrees, and you think, if I pick one more little, I wouldn't think it's an ear that they're gleaning, one more kernel of corn, I'm going to fall over dead of thirst. Go over there to the water. I've provided you some water. It's yours. Go get you some and get you a drink. So Boaz has provided, or Ruth finds in Boaz's field, companionship, protection, and refreshment. And those three are important because we find the same three things in God. As a Christian, once you're saved, you find those same three things. Let's look at companionship. We said Ruth had left her old country. Ruth had left her family. Ruth had left the old friends behind. When I got saved, there were some things that some people I had to leave behind. But I found companionship in the Lord. Proverbs 18:24. A man that hath friends must show himself friendly, and there is a friend that sticketh closer than a brother. In God, I found somebody that when I'm hurt on the inside and all my friends are gone, all my friends have left me, and nobody else can calm me, nobody else can give me that support I need, that companionship. I have a relationship with Jesus Christ on the inside that sticks closer than a brother. It means it's closer than blood. It's closer than I can talk to my mama about some stuff. I can talk to my wife about some stuff. I vent a lot to Ashley. She's got older now. Me and Ashley are really close, and I can talk to her about some stuff. But there's some things that only God can provide, that companionship, that friendship, that stability. I don't even know how to word it, but it can only come from God. And that's what we find. That's what Proverbs 18:24 tells us. There is one that sticks closer than a brother. When everybody else runs and leaves you, when you're Job sitting over there on the ground and your three friends have finally said, okay, I've had enough, I'm leaving, and you're all alone, God is still there. So we find companionship. We find protection. I did not write down these next two verses. Sorry, I'll try to figure out where I got these from, and I'll tell you the verse. We find protection in the Lord. Look here at my other notes. Give me a second, because I want you to know where these come from. We find Nahum 1:7. The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble, and he knoweth them that trust in him. When we feel like the world is coming against us on all sides and all angles, when Satan's firing his darts at us on all sides and all angles, we have a protector in Jesus. There's a picture I've seen on Facebook before of the man who's there and everybody's throwing rocks at him, but there's Jesus standing in front of him. Jesus takes all those. He took all those on the cross for you and me. He is our protection. Without him, we can't survive. Without him, there is no hope. He is our protection. So just like Ruth found companionship, Ruth found protection, we find those. We also find refreshment. And Jeremiah 31 verse 25. For I have satiated, and that's a big word that I like that word because I'm familiar with it from my days of psychology classes. Satiated means filled to the point that you can't hold anymore. It's like I've poured, drink in my cup to the point if I pour another drop, it's going to run over. The cup is satiated. I'm full. Okay, Jeremiah 31:25. For I have satiated the weary soul. I have replenished every sorrowful soul. When we need refreshing, we can only get refreshed from God. The world has nothing to refresh me. There's no party I can go to that refreshes me like the Spirit of God. There's no drug I can take that refreshes my soul like the Spirit of God. There's not enough alcohol in the world to refresh my soul like the Spirit of God. So just like Ruth found in Boaz's field, companionship, protection, and refreshment, we find those same three things in the Lord. A companion, a friend when nobody else is around, protection. Mama and Daddy ain't there to protect you. The police ain't there to protect you. Whoever ain't there to protect you. God is there, always there. And refreshment when our soul is thirsty, when our soul is weary, when we think we've went the last mile we can go. I used to, believe it or not, as fat as I am now, I used to run 5Ks, and I liked, you would run so far and there'd be a water station. And that's how I picture it in my spiritual run, not walk, but spiritual run with God. is I'm running, and God, sometimes I'm getting tired and I'm just about ready to quit. And then you look over the horizon and there's the water station. And he's saying, just take another step. I've got you. And he fills your soul with something that gives you that strength and power to go on, maybe not to the end, but to go on to the next watering station. Because just like we said on companionship, he'll stick closer to you than a brother too. He's not going to give you water after the first mile and then say, okay, the next 25.2 of this marathon you've got to run without water. God doesn't save you and say, you're saved, now figure out the rest of it on your own. You're on your own, buddy. Hope you make it from salvation to death without needing me, because I'm not here. That's not our God. He says in his word, I have satiated the weary soul. I have replenished every sorrowful soul. And then I want to look at, this is the last thing for tonight, and then whenever we do part 3, we'll pick back up. But I want to look at the kindness of Boaz. And true kindness is shown when we extend ourselves to others who, as far as we can see, as far as we can tell, have nothing to give to us in return. That's what true kindness is. You know, if I give you, you hear oh, he'd give them the shirt off his back, but if you expect something in return, what does it mean? True kindness. Boaz was given to Ruth companionship, protection, refreshment, letting her glean the field, giving her all these things, knowing that she can never repay him. That's true kindness. Okay, now let's look at the kindness of God. This is where I'm going to leave off. The kindness of God. Romans 5 and 8. One of my favorite. But God commendeth his love toward us, in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. The kindness of God is that we could give nothing. I could sing his praises every day. I could preach every day. I could. The song says you could all the notes in the music. We could do from sun up to sundown, and then in our sleep dream it, giving praise and honor and glory to God. But it never repays what he's done for us. But the thing is, God didn't expect to be repaid. God just wants us to accept. God wants us to accept the gift, the free gift of salvation, and just live for it. It sounds simple because we humans make this thing hard, but it really is that simple. God loved us. We didn't deserve the love. God sent his son. We didn't deserve his son. His son died so that we could live. And all we have to do is accept it and live for him. But we've made it so difficult. That's the kindness of God. There's a lot in that one. But anyway, that's part 2 of our study in Ruth. And that went through chapter 2, verse 9. And that's all I have for tonight. Hope maybe somebody got a little something out of that. I enjoy the book of Ruth. I think there's more than just a story of a woman and her daughter-in-law. There's a lot that can be taken from the book of Ruth and applied to our lives. We can learn a lot from how Naomi lived her life. We can learn a lot from how Ruth lived her life. We can learn a lot from how Boaz lived his life, and how all these lives come together, and how God used what looked like loss for gain. How being obedient to the Lord grows our spiritual strength, grows our spiritual walk, and all these things. There's a lot to Ruth. Ruth is a very small book in the Bible. Ruth is an easy read. If you want to read a love story, if you want to read of a woman and her daughter-in-law and how things went, you can read it from the surface and stop there and say, I read a good book of the Bible. or you can really dig in and say, how can I use this to relate to me today? And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm not very good at this. I'm not a very good teacher. Never claimed to be. I'm not a very good student. When I was in school, I didn't study. Stuff came naturally. I just went to class, listened to the professor talk, took the test, and passed. Um, that's just how it went. And I've had to learn how to dig, and I've had to learn how to glean. There we go. I've had to learn how to take God's word and glean. And we're going to get to, I believe the word's winnowing, where here in a little bit, where she takes the wheat, the barley. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but anyway, I've had to learn how to do that. And it's important that we don't just watch a video of some bald-headed dude like me that talks about Ruth and listen to it and say I've done my part, or we go to church on Sunday and listen to the preacher preach and say I've done my part, but get in it for yourself. When you get in it yourself, you get so much more out of it. I love when let's picture it this way. I'm going down Megan Boulevard, the hot fresh now lights on at Krispy Kreme. We buy a dozen donuts. I mean, they're so hot they're melting in the box. That smell, I can smell it. I don't just drive home and watch Amanda and the kids eat donuts. I eat donuts. Why? Because I want what's in that box. I want what's in the book. I don't want to smell it while somebody else gets to enjoy it. So let's get in. I encourage you, if you're watching this, if you're not watching this, I don't know what that means, but anyway, I was going to say if you're not watching this, do the same, but if you're not watching it, you don't know what I said. But if you're watching this, don't just watch it to hear me talk, because I'm a very boring person. Get in it yourself and dig. Dig after you read these, or after you hear what I've got out of it, because you may get something totally different, and that's perfectly fine. That's actually good, because we all see things different. We all have different experiences in life. We've all been down different roads, but we all serve the same God who sees us through. So that's part 2, Book of Ruth. Hope you all have a wonderful Christmas. If we don't do one of these again before Christmas, hopefully maybe either Sunday or first part of next week we'll get a chance to do part 3. But if not, let's hope you have a wonderful Christmas. And I encourage you, remember, don't leave Jesus in the manger. Don't look at baby Jesus and the story in there. Remember what he did on the cross for us. And I could go on about that for a while too, but I don't know. I can talk a while when nobody's in front of me. When everybody's in front of me and I see your faces, I kind of clam up, but now I can't shut up. But I'm glad, because God's put something in me. Like Jeremiah said, he tried to shut up one time, and he said it felt like there was a fire in his bones. And I'm glad God's gave me something that it just bubbles out. And if you don't every once in a while have a little bit of God bubble out of you, you might want to check up and make sure there's some God in you. And if there's not, get him in you, and then he'll bubble out. Love each and every one of you, and we'll see you next time.